Today's topic is going to be emotional repair. Emotional repair, as it relates to habits, comes in the form of emotional regulation, or what we often call self-regulation. Now, in terms of mindfulness, if we're mindful of what we're doing, we would call it self-regulation. And if we are subconscious or not mindful, we would refer to it as emotional repair. And this, again, is the process by which we manage and respond to our emotions and behaviors within certain situations or contexts. It involves strategies to modulate and control our emotional experiences, usually with the subconscious goal of avoiding discomfort or loss. Now, when individuals develop or engage in habitual behavior, they often do so as a result of prior self-regulatory processes. And again, these could have been good. That would be self-regulation done adaptively, but oftentimes it's subconscious and it's done negatively. And so again, we would call it emotional repair or immediate emotional repair. Individuals often develop habits as coping mechanisms to deal with stress or anxiety or other emotional states. And when we engage in these habits, they might provide a sense of immediate comfort or routine or distraction, and that would contribute to a sense of immediate emotional well-being. But often, again, if done unmindfully, it would end up being or having a very long-term negative effect. On this slide, we're going to discuss mindless emotional regulation. Of course, this is the negative side of things. And if we're not mindful of our self-regulation, then we're going to resort to immediate emotional repair. The following are some examples of habits that we can develop that offer what seems to be emotional repair. And these can consist of comfort habits. So, for example, some habits such as engaging in specific behaviors like snacking or smoking or drinking alcohol, they can provide a temporary sense of comfort or a feeling that we're in control during times of stress. However, of course, to be clear, these are negative examples, and they offer that emotional repair, but it's at the cost of our long-term health. Additionally, there are habits that can be distracting. So, habits like watching YouTube videos or TV or playing video games or engaging in other repetitive activities, they may serve as a distraction from negative emotions like responsibility or mental focus. So if we have, say, a task we need to accomplish or homework or study or skill development, something productive, those things can feel taxing and emotionally uncomfortable. And so these distracting habits can be a problem with that. So it's also worth noting that our digital devices, such as our cell phones or checking Facebook, texts, emails, and etc., these are designed to capture our attention. They're designed to be distracting. And they use various techniques such as notifications, alerts, and badges. But these distractions can lead to compulsive behavior. So we need to be careful, and they can be particularly problematic if we don't address these problems and limit the usage. And finally, there are routine habits. So we can establish daily routines that create a sense of stability and predictability. These contribute to a sense of emotional regulation. And examples might include stopping at a fast food restaurant or a coffee shop consistently, or eating at a certain time of the day or a certain amount of food, despite the fact that we're hungry or not. We don't have to be hungry. It's just a certain time of the day. We hit that cue. It's breakfast or it's dinner time, and we usually eat this much food, and so we just don't stop. So examples such as that. Now, over time, these emotional repair behaviors do become habits, regardless of if we even enjoy them or not. So remember, a habit, once it's established, occurs when we encounter the cue. We simply do the behavior, and we do not need that reward or benefit that we perceived when we first developed these habits. So we will continue to perform the habit simply because it's a habit, irregardless of what that is doing to our overall outcomes. On the positive side of things, we have mindful self-regulation. Understanding the relationship between emotional regulation and habitual behavior can help us distinguish between adaptive or maladaptive behaviors, depending on their impact on our overall well-being. So identifying and modifying habits that contribute to emotional distress can be an integral part of our personal interventions designed at enhancing our long-term well-being. Now, more precisely, self-regulation is the ability to manage our thoughts, emotions, and behaviors to achieve long-term goals or meet specific standards. Now, this is an overarching topic, so self-regulation can be positive or negative. One can have poor self-regulation, but in this context, we're going to call that emotional repair, and if we're using it mindfully, we're going to call it self-regulation. It involves a process such as monitoring our progress. It can involve setting our goals and adjusting behaviors accordingly. So as such, self-regulation is crucial for maintaining overall well-being and achieving our goals. It should make sense that habits and self-regulation are closely connected and related. Habits once formed can be seen as a product of our self-regulation. When we engage in, say, habitual behaviors, we often do so as a result of what our self-regulation processes were in the past. Here are some key examples of the relationship between self-regulation and habitual behavior. So first, self-regulation can be used for monitoring and adjustment. We can effectively use self-regulation to continuously monitor our behavior and make adjustments as necessary. When a habit is formed, the initial self-regulatory effort transitions into automaticity, allowing the behavior to occur with minimal conscious effort. So it can also be used for efficiency. Effective self-regulation aims for efficient use of our cognitive resources. Habits, once ingrained, obviously, operate very efficiently. This allows us to perform routine tasks with minimal conscious effort, and that again frees up our cognitive resources for other purposes. We simply need to make sure that our behaviors that we're using that become efficient are goal congruent. We have to be careful of that. And we can also use self-regulation for our long-term well-being. Of course, that's the intent. And so self-regulation can be used to create habits that will establish positive behaviors that align with our long-term outcomes that we're hoping for. So if we're consistent with our behaviors and we use our self-regulation to create good habits, then we will have good long-term outcomes. Now that we have discussed mindless emotional repair and mindful self-regulation, we will now contrast these two perspectives. As we progress through the stages of habit formation, we can utilize our intrinsic motivation and self-regulation in conjunction with context-dependent repetition with very prominent identifiable cues. In order to establish better habits, we need to utilize self-regulation and implementation intentions along with habit substitution. And we can do this while emphasizing positive reinforcement and purposeful focus on reinforcing repetition with our new behaviors. So there's quite the distinguishing characteristics between mindful self-regulation and unconscious emotional repair. Now remember, we're usually going to default to unconscious emotional repair, but if we're careful and we use our self-regulation, then we'll get very different outcomes. So let's take a look at 3 examples. First, with self-regulation, we'll be able to establish a sense of purpose with our behaviors by using SMART goals. Otherwise, we will be basically impulse-driven. We're going to detach ourselves from motivation and just use immediate emotional repair. Next, behavior monitoring will help us to identify patterns and cues that are leading to negative behaviors. That would allow us to change those behaviors or watch for the cue and then focus more on adaptive behaviors. Otherwise, our actions will simply be triggered by cues with no regard to any other options that we might have that would be more positive. And then finally, we're going to have cue awareness, and that's going to allow us to be more effective in regulating our behaviors and forming goal congruent habits if we use self-regulation. Otherwise, despite negative consequences, negative outcomes on our health or our ambitions, we're going to simply continue to operate in the habits that we have already established, and this is going to be irregardless of our long-term outcomes. And again, these habits, once established, even though negative, are going to be very, very challenging to break. And that's what happens if we use emotional repair rather than. As we wrap up today's lesson, consider these following 3 takeaways. First, if we have a habit that we're wanting to change, we can incorporate new habit formation into our personal intervention. And this can be a long-term strategy for sustainable change in our behaviors. Secondly, we can utilize self-regulation rather than mindless emotional repair to assist in goal-congruent habit formation. And again, self-regulation offers that ability to manage our thoughts and our emotions and our behavior while we look at and observe and adjust our current behaviors. And then finally, number 3, remember that without mindful self-regulation, we're going to default to that mindless emotional repair. It feels good in the moment, but it's not going to take us to a good place. So just remember that if we're not using mindful self-regulation, we're going to default to emotional repair. So for today's action item, I want you to identify a single area, so we'll just keep this to one thing, that you find is most incongruent with your goals. So, particularly the health goals, what one behavior is causing most of the problems? So once you have identified that, I want you to non-judgmentally observe how you're feeling, what you're thinking, what that cue is. Are you resorting to comfort habits? Are you doing something that just makes you feel better, so it rather than do the behavior that's goal congruent, you do something that makes you feel more comfortable in the very short term? Are you being distracted? So are there habits, just behaviors or something that are distracting you and pulling you away from what you would like to be doing, but you're just getting distracted with other behaviors rather than what you would like to be doing? And then finally, is it just a routine? Is it just simply other habits that you have become so accustomed to that you default to that routine rather than do what you want to do? So take a look, use your self-regulation and identify one area and just try to put some understanding to that area of how you're coping with that emotionally. All right, that concludes today's lesson. I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you next